Welcome, dear viewer, to a world where ancient sands whisper tales of forbidden desires and destiny hangs by a thread as thin as desert air. In the colossal shadow of Egypt's most magnificent monuments, a love so dangerous, so utterly defiant, is about to ignite. She, bound by chains, he, privileged by birth, their souls destined to connect, yet society demands their separation. Can the deepest secrets of the past forge a future against all odds? Prepare for a journey of passion, betrayal, and the ultimate price of truth. Tell us, from where in the world are you joining us for this epic romance? And what is it about period dramas that captures your heart so completely? In the 14th century before the birth of Christ, when the mighty Nile carved its eternal path through the golden sands of Egypt, and the pharaohs ruled as living gods upon earth, the great Amenhotep III commanded the construction of a mortuary temple that would rival the ancient pyramids themselves. In the shadow of those timeless monuments, where the desert wind carried whispers of forgotten dynasties, a love would bloom that would challenge the very foundations of an empire. The merciless sun blazed overhead like the eye of Ra himself, casting waves of heat that shimmered across the construction site where hundreds of workers labored under its punishing gaze. Limestone blocks, each weighing more than 10 men combined, were dragged across wooden rollers by teams of slaves whose bronze skin gleamed with perspiration. The air thrummed with the rhythmic chanting of work songs, the crack of overseers' whips, and the grinding of stone against stone. Among these laborers moved Hatshepsut, her bare feet finding purchase on the scorching sand as she carried yet another block toward the rising walls of what would become Pharaoh Amenhotep's eternal resting place. Her calloused hands, marked by 6 years of bondage, gripped the rough limestone with practiced ease, but her amber eyes held a sharpness that set her apart from her fellow slaves. Where others saw only burden, she saw angles and proportions, weight distribution and structural integrity. The great pyramid of Khufu loomed in the distance like a silent sentinel, its perfect geometry a testament to the architectural mastery of ages past. But here, in this new temple rising from the desert floor, Hatshepsut recognized something revolutionary taking shape. The design was bold, ambitious, incorporating elements she had never seen in traditional Egyptian construction. Yet as she observed the work progressing around her, a cold dread began to settle in her chest. When the horns sounded for the midday rest, most slaves collapsed gratefully in whatever shade they could find, their bodies crying out for respite from the brutal labor. But Hatshepsut found herself drawn to the foundation stones, her trained eye catching details that others missed. The measurements were wrong, subtly, dangerously wrong. She knelt in the sand, her heart racing as she traced the lines with her finger. The weight distribution calculations were flawed. When the massive granite columns were installed and the roof stones set in place, the foundation would not hold. The temple's main sanctuary, where the pharaoh's mummified body would rest during sacred ceremonies, would collapse under its own weight. Without conscious thought, she picked up a stick and began sketching in the sand, her movements quick and precise. Lines intersected at perfect angles. Numbers flowed in elegant hieratic script, and gradually a solution emerged. The foundation could be saved, but only if the error was caught now, before more stones were set. Lost in the mathematical beauty of the problem, Hatshepsut did not hear the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her work. She looked up to find herself staring into the dark, intelligent eyes of Senenmut, master builder of the royal construction project. He was a man in his early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the bearing of nobility written in every line of his body. His white linen tunic was of the finest quality, pleated with mathematical precision and bordered with gold thread that caught the sunlight. A collar of beaten gold adorned his throat, and his hands, though strong from years of architectural work, bore none of the calluses and scars that marked the slaves. "What is this?" His voice carried the authority of command, but also a note of curiosity that made Hatshepsut's pulse quicken with fear. She had been caught doing something no slave should know how to do. "Forgive me, master," she whispered, starting to smooth away the drawings with her palm. "I was only—" "Stop!" The single word froze her hand in midair. Senenmut knelt beside her, his eyes scanning the geometric patterns she had traced in the sand. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion, then to something approaching amazement. The calculations were not only correct, they were elegant. The solution she had devised would not only prevent the collapse, but would actually strengthen the entire structure, distributing the weight more efficiently than his own original design. "Who taught you this?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. Around them, other slaves watched nervously, sensing the tension in the air but not understanding its source. Hatshepsut's throat felt dry as the desert sand. To reveal her knowledge was to court death, but to lie to a royal architect was equally dangerous. "My father," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Before we were brought here, he was an architect in Nubia, and I watched him work." The memory rose unbidden in her mind, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday instead of 6 years ago. She could see her father, Kush, bent over his papyrus scrolls in their home in Kerma, his dark hands moving with practiced precision as he designed a temple for the Nubian king. She had been barely 18 then, curious and eager to learn, and he had indulged her interest in his work. "Architecture is mathematics made divine, my daughter," he had told her, his voice warm with affection and pride. "The gods speak through perfect proportions. When stone is cut and placed according to their sacred geometry, it becomes more than mere rock. It becomes eternal." Those lessons had continued even after the Egyptian raiders came, even after her mother fell beneath their swords, and she and her father were chained and marched north to slavery. In the first months of their captivity, when hope still flickered in their hearts, he had continued teaching her in whispered conversations during the brief rest periods. But grief and despair had taken their toll, and within a year, Kush was dead, leaving his daughter alone with knowledge that could either save her or destroy her. Senenmut studied her face intently, searching for deception and finding none. The woman before him was clearly a slave, her simple brown tunic marking her status as surely as if it were branded on her skin. Yet the calculations in the sand demonstrated a level of mathematical sophistication that rivaled his own education in the finest temples of Memphis. "Show me," he said suddenly, his decision made. "There is a problem with the ventilation system in the eastern chamber that has troubled me for weeks. If you truly understand these principles—" He began sketching in the sand beside her drawings, outlining the chamber's dimensions and the failed attempts to create adequate airflow. Hatshepsut watched his hands move, noting the confidence in his strokes, the precision of his measurements. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and waited. For a moment she hesitated. To solve his problem would be to reveal the full extent of her abilities, to step irrevocably across a line that separated slave from free, ignorant from educated. But the challenge called to something deep within her, to the part of her soul that her father had nurtured and that 6 years of bondage had not been able to kill. She leaned forward and began to draw, her stick moving swiftly across the sand. The solution came to her as naturally as breathing, a combination of Egyptian engineering principles and Nubian techniques for dealing with desert heat. Within minutes, she had outlined a system of interconnected air shafts that would not only cool the chamber, but would create a gentle breeze that would keep the sacred oils from becoming rancid in the heat. When she finished, silence stretched between them, like a taut rope. Senenmut stared at the drawings, his mind racing to verify her calculations. The solution was not only correct, it was brilliant. More than that, it incorporated techniques he had never seen before. innovations that could revolutionize temple construction throughout Egypt. "This is," he began, then stopped, unable to find words adequate to express his amazement. "Will it work, Master?" Hatshepsut asked quietly, her eyes downcast in the proper manner of a slave addressing her superior. "It will work," he confirmed, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. "It will work better than anything I could have devised." Around them, the other slaves had begun to stir as the rest period neared its end. Soon the overseers would return, and the afternoon's labor would begin. But Senenmut found himself reluctant to let this moment end, to return to the normal order of master and slave when something extraordinary had just occurred. "What is your name?" he asked. "Hatshepsut, Master." The name suited her, he thought. It meant foremost of noble women, a name that spoke of royal blood and high birth. How had such a woman come to be laboring in the desert, carrying stones like any common slave? "I would speak with you again," he said carefully, aware that curious eyes were beginning to turn their way. "About the construction, there are practical concerns that the workers understand better than the architects. Perhaps you could help me understand these things." It was a thin pretense, and they both knew it, but it offered a way for them to meet again without arousing immediate suspicion. Hatshepsut nodded, her heart beating so hard she was certain he must hear it. "I serve at your pleasure, Master." "Tonight, then, after the evening meal, in the temple gardens, by the lotus pool." He rose to his feet, brushing the sand from his tunic, and walked away without looking back. But Hatshepsut remained kneeling by their drawings, her mind reeling with the implications of what had just occurred. From across the construction site, she felt eyes upon her and looked up to see Katie, the brutal overseer of the slave gangs, watching her with suspicion. He was a man who had clawed his way up from the lowest ranks through cruelty and cunning, and his small, cruel eyes missed nothing that might threaten his position. He had noticed the master builder's interest in the Nubian slave, and his expression promised that he would be watching her closely from now on. Near the administrative tents, another pair of eyes observed the scene with equal interest but different intent. Amenemheb, second architect of the royal project, had been watching Senenmut with growing resentment for months. They had been students together in Memphis, rivals for the attention of their teachers and the favor of the royal court. When Senenmut had been chosen as master builder over him, the wound to Amenemheb's pride had festered like an infected cut. Now he saw his rival showing unusual interest in a mere slave, and his calculating mind began to work. Perhaps this unexpected development could be turned to his advantage. Perhaps Senenmut's inexplicable fascination with the woman could be used to bring about his downfall. As the afternoon wore on, and the slaves returned to their labor, Hatshepsut found it difficult to concentrate on the simple task of moving stones. Her mind kept returning to the moment when Senenmut had looked at her drawings, when she had seen recognition and respect in his eyes, instead of the casual indifference with which masters typically regarded their property. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled the treasures in Pharaoh's tomb. The workers' chants grew more subdued as exhaustion took its toll, and the overseers' whips cracked more frequently as they drove their charges through the final hours of the day. When darkness finally fell and the slaves were dismissed to their quarters, Hatshepsut made her way to the simple meal of bread and beer that constituted their evening ration. But food held no appeal for her tonight. Her stomach churned with nervous anticipation as she contemplated the meeting to come. The slave quarters were a collection of mud brick buildings arranged around a central courtyard, cramped and airless, but providing basic shelter from the elements. Hatshepsut shared a small room with 3 other women, their sleeping mats arranged on the hard-packed earth floor. As her companions settled down for the night, she waited in the darkness, listening to their breathing slow and deepen. When she was certain they slept, she rose silently and made her way to the small window that faced the temple complex. The gardens lay beyond the construction site, a haven of green in the desert landscape where lotus blossoms floated in sacred pools and date palms provided blessed shade during the heat of the day. She slipped through the window and into the night, her bare feet making no sound on the cool sand. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the landscape and turning the half-built temple into a maze of mysterious shadows. She moved carefully, avoiding the areas where guards might patrol, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. The temple gardens were a marvel of engineering in their own right, fed by an intricate system of channels that brought water from the Nile to nourish the sacred plants. The air was sweet with the scent of jasmine and lotus, a welcome relief from the dust and sweat of the construction site. She found the lotus pool easily enough, its surface mirror-smooth in the moonlight, reflecting the stars like scattered diamonds. But as she approached, doubt began to creep into her mind. What was she doing here? What could possibly come of this meeting except danger for them both? She was about to turn back when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. Senenmut emerged from the shadows, no longer wearing the formal attire of his office, but dressed in a simple tunic that made him seem more approachable, more human. "I was not certain you would come," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Nor was I," she admitted, then caught herself. It was not a slave's place to express doubt or uncertainty to her master. But Senenmut seemed not to notice the breach of protocol. He moved to stand beside the pool, his reflection joining hers in the dark water. "Tell me about your father," he said, "about what he taught you." And so, in the moonlit garden with the ancient pyramids standing silent witness in the distance, Hatshepsut began to speak. She told him of Kush's brilliance, of the temples he had designed that still stood proud and strong in the Nubian capital. She spoke of the sacred geometry he had taught her, the way mathematics could be used to create beauty that would endure for eternity. As she talked, Senenmut found himself drawn not just to her knowledge, but to the passion in her voice, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of architectural principles and engineering solutions. Here was a mind that matched his own, a soul that understood the divine nature of their craft. When she finished, silence settled between them like a comfortable blanket. The night air was cool against their skin, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate. "I have a proposition for you," Senenmut said finally. "There are aspects of this construction that trouble me, problems that might benefit from a different perspective. If you were willing to share your insights, it would be of great value to the project." They both knew it was more than that, this offer he was making. It was a chance for her to use the gifts her father had given her, to honor his memory by creating something beautiful and lasting. But it was also dangerous, a path that could lead to discovery and death. "I would be honored to serve," she said simply. "Then we will meet again, tomorrow night and the nights that follow, until the temple is complete." He turned to go, then paused. "Hatshepsut." "Yes, master." "Be careful. There are those who would not understand what we are attempting here." She nodded, understanding the warning implicit in his words. They were crossing boundaries that had stood for thousands of years, challenging the natural order that placed nobles above slaves, men above women, Egyptians above foreigners. After he had gone, she remained by the pool for a long time, staring down at her reflection in the dark water. The woman looking back at her was still a slave, still bound by chains, both visible and invisible. But something had changed tonight, some fundamental shift in the way she saw herself and her place in the world. Finally, she made her way back to the slave quarters, moving like a ghost through the moonlit landscape. Her roommate still slept soundly, unaware of her absence or the momentous events that had transpired in the garden. She lay down on her sleeping mat and closed her eyes, but sleep eluded her. Instead, she found herself thinking of her father, of the last conversation they had shared before death claimed him. Promise me, he had whispered, his voice weak but his eyes still burning with the fire that had driven him to create wonders in stone. Promise me you will not let them break you. You carry our knowledge, our traditions, our dreams. Do not let them die with me. She had promised, though at the time the words had seemed empty, a comfort offered to a dying man. What use was knowledge to a slave? What good were dreams when survival itself was uncertain? But now, lying in the darkness with the memory of Senenmut's amazed expression fresh in her mind, she began to understand what her father had meant. Knowledge was power, even for a slave. Dreams could become reality if one was brave enough to pursue them. She reached beneath her sleeping mat and withdrew the small amulet she kept hidden there, a bronze figure of Ptah, the god of craftsmen and architects. It had been her father's, passed down through generations of builders and designers, and now it was all she had left of her former life. The stones speak to those who listen with their hearts, she whispered, repeating her father's favorite saying. I hear them, Father. I hear them calling. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of the desert and the promise of dawn. Soon the sun would rise again, and with it would come another day of back-breaking labor under the merciless Egyptian sky. But tonight had changed everything. Tonight, she had remembered who she was beneath the slave's tunic and the overseer's whip. She was Hatshepsut, daughter of Cush, keeper of ancient knowledge and guardian of sacred traditions. And tomorrow night she would begin the work that would either destroy her or set her free. The amulet grew warm in her palm as she held it close to her heart, and for a moment she could almost hear her father's voice on the wind, proud and approving. She had honored her promise. She had not let them break her. Now, in the shadow of the eternal pyramids, her true destiny was about to begin. 3 months had passed since that first fateful encounter in the temple gardens, and the construction of Amenhotep's mortuary temple had progressed with remarkable efficiency. The foundation stones now rose majestically from the desert floor, their perfect alignment a testament to mathematical precision that few could truly appreciate. But for those who understood the language of stone and mortar, the improvements in the design were nothing short of revolutionary. The lotus blossoms in the sacred pools had bloomed and withered twice over during these months, their petals floating like scattered prayers on the dark water. It was here, beneath the silver gaze of the moon, that 2 souls had begun a dance as dangerous as it was inevitable. What had started as clandestine consultations about construction techniques had evolved into something far more complex, far more perilous. Hatshepsut moved through the shadows with the practiced grace of one who had learned to navigate the treacherous waters between obedience and rebellion. Her bare feet made no sound on the cool stone pathways as she approached their usual meeting place, her heart beating a rhythm that seemed to echo the ancient drums of her homeland. The simple brown tunic that marked her as property of the crown could not diminish the regal bearing that seemed to emanate from her very bones, a reminder of the noble blood that flowed in her veins despite her current circumstances. Senenmut was already waiting by the largest lotus pool, his tall frame silhouetted against the moonlit water. The formal regalia of his office had been abandoned in favor of a simple white tunic that made him appear younger, more vulnerable. In the 3 months since their first meeting, subtle changes had transformed him. The rigid certainty that had once characterized his every movement had given way to something more thoughtful, more questioning. He found himself seeing the world through different eyes, challenging assumptions that had never before been questioned. "I was beginning to think you might not come tonight," he said softly as she emerged from the shadows, his voice carrying a note of relief that he tried unsuccessfully to hide. "The overseer kept us working later than usual," she replied, settling gracefully beside the pool's edge. "Katie grows more suspicious with each passing day. I fear our meetings have not gone unnoticed." During these months of secret encounters, they had developed a complex system of communication that allowed them to coordinate their meetings without arousing suspicion. Architectural symbols carved discreetly into workstones served as their silent language, conveying messages that only they could decipher. A particular arrangement of measuring tools left seemingly carelessly on a work table could indicate a change in meeting time or location. It was a dangerous game they played, one that required constant vigilance and nerves of steel. "Show me what you discovered today," Senenmut said, producing a roll of papyrus from beneath his tunic. The precious writing material was worth more than most slaves would see in a lifetime, yet he shared it freely with her, recognizing that her insights were invaluable to the project's success. Hatshepsut accepted the papyrus with reverent hands, her fingers tracing the smooth surface with the appreciation of one who understood its worth. "The Eastern Foundation is settling unevenly," she began, her voice taking on the confident tone she used when discussing technical matters. "The limestone beneath the third column shows signs of stress fractures that will worsen with time." As she spoke, she began sketching on the papyrus with a bronze stylus he had given her weeks earlier, another small gift that represented far more than its material value. Her drawings were precise and elegant, combining the mathematical rigor of Egyptian engineering with innovative techniques learned at her father's knee in distant Nubia. "The solution lies in redistributing the weight," she continued, her amber eyes bright with intellectual passion. "If we create a series of interconnected support arches beneath the foundation, the load will be spread more evenly across the bedrock. It's a technique my father used when building on unstable ground near the Nile's floodplains." Senenmut studied her drawings with growing amazement, as he had so many times before. Each meeting brought new revelations, new solutions to problems that had seemed intractable. Her mind worked in ways that complemented his own training, approaching challenges from angles that his formal education had never considered. "You see buildings the way poets see words," he murmured, his voice thick with admiration. "Where I see stone and mortar, you see living entities that breathe and move and respond to the forces around them." The compliment sent warmth flooding through Hatshepsut's chest, a dangerous pleasure that she tried desperately to suppress. In the months since their meetings had begun, she had found herself looking forward to these stolen hours with an intensity that frightened her. The intellectual stimulation was intoxicating, but it was more than that. In Senenmut's presence, she felt truly seen for the first time since her father's death, recognized not as property, but as a person of worth and intelligence. "Your own understanding grows deeper with each passing day," she replied carefully, aware that they were treading on dangerous ground. "The modifications you made to the ventilation system last week were inspired. The airflow through the inner chambers will keep the sacred oils fresh, even in the height of summer." Their conversations had evolved over the months, shifting gradually from purely technical discussions to exchanges that revealed the depths of their personalities. Senenmut had shared stories of his privileged upbringing in Memphis, of the pressure he felt to live up to his family's expectations and maintain their position at court. Hatshepsut had spoken of her childhood in Nubia, of the rich cultural traditions that had shaped her understanding of the world, of the pain of watching her homeland disappear behind her as she was marched north in chains. Tonight, as they worked together on the foundation problem, their hands moved in unconscious harmony across the papyrus. When Senenmut reached for the stylus at the same moment she did, their fingers brushed with electric intensity. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, but it sent shockwaves through both of them that had nothing to do with architecture or engineering. "Forgive me," he whispered, pulling his hand back as if he had been burned. But his dark eyes remained fixed on her face, drinking in the elegant curve of her cheekbone, the way the moonlight caught the gold flecks in her amber gaze. "There is nothing to forgive," she replied. Though her voice trembled slightly with emotions she dared not name, the space between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities, with desires that could never be acknowledged, much less acted upon. To distract himself from the dangerous turn his thoughts were taking, Senenmut reached into his tunic and withdrew a small package wrapped in fine linen. "I brought you something," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "For your wounds." Hatshepsut accepted the package with trembling fingers, unwrapping it to reveal a small clay pot filled with healing salve. The ointment was clearly expensive, made from rare herbs and oils that only the wealthy could afford. But more precious than its monetary value was the care it represented, the evidence that he had noticed her suffering and sought to ease it. "You should not spend your resources on a slave," she protested weakly, even as her heart swelled with gratitude and something deeper, more dangerous. "You are not just a slave," he said fiercely, then caught himself, horrified by the admission. They stared at each other across the moonlit pool, both acutely aware that he had crossed a line from which there could be no retreat. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither dared voice. Finally, Hatshepsut spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What am I then, if not a slave?" The question hung in the air like incense, sweet and intoxicating and forbidden. Senenmut found himself leaning closer, drawn by forces he could not control or understand. "You are—" he began, then stopped, the words dying on his lips as reality crashed back around them. He was betrothed to Lady Mutemwaya, daughter of one of the most powerful viziers in the kingdom. The wedding had been arranged years ago, a political alliance that would strengthen both families' positions at court. To even think of another woman was a betrayal of everything he had been raised to believe, everything he owed to his family and his station. "I should not have said that," he said, rising abruptly from his position beside the pool. "This is madness. We are both forgetting our places, our duties." Hatshepsut felt the rejection like a physical blow, though she had known it must come. The brief moment of connection, of possibility, shattered like glass against the immutable reality of their circumstances. She was a slave. He was a noble. She was Nubian. He was Egyptian. She was nothing. He was everything. The gulf between them was as vast as the desert itself, unbridgeable by any force known to man. "Of course, master," she said quietly, her voice carefully stripped of emotion. "You are right to remember our proper relationship." But even as she spoke the words of submission, her mind was working on a different problem entirely. During her careful observations of the construction site, she had noticed irregularities in some of the structural plans, subtle flaws that seemed almost deliberate. At first, she had attributed them to simple human error, but as the pattern became clearer, a more sinister possibility had emerged. Someone was sabotaging the temple. The realization had come to her gradually, piece by piece, as she observed the work progressing around her. Certain measurements were consistently wrong, always in ways that would weaken rather than strengthen the structure. Support beams were being positioned incorrectly, their angles calculated to create stress points that would fail under pressure. Most disturbing of all, the errors seemed to be concentrated in areas where large numbers of people would gather during ceremonial occasions. She had spent weeks trying to convince herself that she was imagining things, that her fears were the product of an overwrought mind. But tonight, as she studied the foundation plans Senenmut had shared with her, the pattern became undeniable. Someone with access to the architectural drawings was deliberately introducing flaws that would cause catastrophic failure during the pharaoh's upcoming said festival, when hundreds of nobles and priests would gather in the temple to witness the sacred ceremonies. The knowledge burned in her chest like molten metal, a terrible secret that she could share with no one. To reveal what she had discovered would require admitting the extent of her own knowledge, exposing the true nature of her meetings with Senenmut. It would mean death for both of them, but it might also mean death for hundreds of innocent people if she remained silent. "Master," she said carefully, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart, "there is something I must tell you about the construction, something that troubles me greatly." Before she could continue, the sound of footsteps on the gravel path made them both freeze. Someone was approaching the garden, moving with the heavy tread of authority. Senenmut quickly rolled up the papyrus and tucked it beneath his tunic, while Hatshepsut melted back into the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. From the darkness beyond the lotus pools, Immerse emerged into the moonlight. The veteran slave was a man of perhaps 50 years, his body bent and scarred by decades of hard labor, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. He had been watching Hatshepsut for weeks, noting her increasingly confident demeanor, her subtle changes in behavior that spoke of secrets and hidden knowledge. "I thought I might find you here," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom and hard-won experience. "We need to talk, young one. About the dangerous game you are playing." Hatshepsut felt the blood drain from her face as she realized that her carefully guarded secret had been discovered. Immerse had been like a father to many of the younger slaves, offering protection and guidance to those who needed it most. But he was also pragmatic, a survivor who understood that sometimes sacrifice was necessary to protect the greater good. "I do not know what you mean," she said weakly. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they carried no conviction. "Do not insult my intelligence," Immerse replied, though his tone was not unkind. "I have seen you slipping away at night, seen the way you study the construction with eyes that understand what they are seeing. I have watched the master builder's interest in you grow from curiosity to something far more dangerous." The old slave's words hit her like physical blows, each one driving home the reality of how exposed she had become. If Immerse had noticed, how many others had seen the signs? How long before someone with less benevolent intentions decided to act on their suspicions? "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of water against the pool's edge. "I want you to be careful," he said simply. "I want you to remember that your actions affect more than just yourself. There are others who depend on you, who look to you for strength and hope. Do not throw away your life for the impossible dream of a love that can never be." His words cut deep, because they contained a truth she had been trying desperately to deny. She had allowed herself to hope, to dream of possibilities that existed only in the realm of fantasy. But reality was harsh and unforgiving, and the price of her foolishness would be paid not just by herself, but by everyone who cared about her. "I understand," she whispered, though the admission felt like tearing out a piece of her soul. Immerse studied her face in the moonlight, seeing the pain and resignation in her eyes. "I hope you do," he said gently, "because tomorrow, Katie plans to follow you. He has been building a case against you for weeks, documenting your movements, your behavior. If he catches you in a compromising position..." He did not need to finish the sentence. They both knew what Katie's discovery would mean. The overseer was a cruel man who took pleasure in the suffering of others, and he would not hesitate to use whatever he learned to advance his own position, regardless of the cost in human lives. As Immerse melted back into the shadows, leaving her alone with her fears and regrets, Hatshepsut realized that her time was running out. The sabotage she had discovered, the feelings she had developed for Senenmut, the dangerous game they had been playing in the moonlit garden, all of it was about to come crashing down around them. She looked up at the stars wheeling overhead, the same stars that had watched over her ancestors in Nubia, and whispered a prayer to the gods of her fathers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new choices that would determine not just her own fate, but the fate of everyone she had come to care about. The temple rising in the distance stood as a monument to human ambition and divine glory, but she alone knew the terrible secret, hidden within its walls. Soon, She would have to decide whether to speak the truth and face the consequences, or remain silent and watch as hundreds of innocent lives were lost to one man's jealousy and ambition. The moonlight reflected off the lotus pool like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold, and utterly indifferent to the human drama unfolding in its presence. In the morning, the sun would rise again, and with it would come the reckoning that could no longer be avoided. The air in Katie's quarters hung heavy, thick with the scent of stale perspiration and the metallic tang of fear. Instruments of punishment, whips coiled like sleeping serpents, shackles glinting dully, hung from the mud-brick walls, silent threats to any who dared defy the overseer. Hatshepsut stood before him, her shoulders aching from the brutal labor of the day, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Katie's small, cruel eyes, set in a face hardened by years of petty tyranny, bore into her, promising retribution. He leaned forward, a predatory smile stretching his lips. "So little Nubian bird," Katie's voice rasped. "You believe you can fly in the shadows, unseen? I have watched you. For weeks I have noted your absences, your strange whispers, your eyes that see too much. What dark magic are you brewing in the night?" Hatshepsut's mind raced, a whirlwind of desperate thoughts. To reveal her secret meetings with Senenmut, to speak of architectural plans, would be instant death, not only for her, but for the master builder, and perhaps even for the pharaoh's great project. She had to offer him something, anything, that satisfied his hunger for control, without betraying the truth. Her gaze drifted to the corner where a few emaciated figures lay huddled, victims of a sudden fever that swept through the slave quarters. A desperate gambit formed in her mind. "Forgive me, master," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound fearful, but with an underlying steel that belied her terror. "There is no magic, only hunger. My sister, she is sick, and the rations, they are not enough. I have been slipping out to find what scraps I can, for her, for the others." Katie's eyes narrowed, his smile twisting into a sneer. "Stealing, then? For worthless vermin?" He paced, his heavy footsteps echoing the pound of her own pulse. "Such compassion for a slave, it is a weakness, but a slave who steals must be taught a lesson, a brutal lesson." He seized a thin, braided leather whip from the wall, testing its weight in his hand. Hatshepsut braced herself, her hands clenching into fists. She knew the pain would be immense, searing, but she had endured worse. This physical torment was a price she would pay, a sacrifice to keep her true work hidden. She focused on the face of her father in her mind, on his words, "You carry our knowledge, our traditions, our dreams. Do not let them die with me." She would not break, not now, not ever. The first lash tore across her back, a fiery serpent searing her skin. Hatshepsut stifled a gasp, biting down on her lip until she tasted blood. The second followed, then the third, each one ripping through the thin fabric of her tunic, biting deep into her flesh. She stumbled, but did not fall. She would not give him that satisfaction. She heard a choked cry from the entrance, and through her blurring vision, she saw Immerse, the old, wise slave who had become a silent guardian to her and many others. His face was a mask of helpless anguish, his gaze filled with a profound understanding of her sacrifice. He knew she was protecting something far greater than stolen food. From a distance, in the fading light of the construction site, Senenmut saw the figure of Katie, whip in hand, a silhouette of brutality against the setting sun. He saw the way Hatshepsut's body stiffened with each strike, a defiant posture even in agony. A cold dread coiled in his gut, a guilt so sharp it felt like a physical blow. He had seen countless slaves whipped, a daily occurrence, but this was different. This was her. This was the woman whose mind captivated him, whose presence brought light to his sterile world. The sight ignited a burning fury he barely recognized. He, Senenmut, master builder, a man of power and privilege, had put her in this position. He felt the true, horrifying cost of their secret. The pain she endured for him for their shared knowledge solidified a love in his heart that transcended all logic, all societal boundaries. He would pay any price to protect her. As days turned into weeks, Hatshepsut's back slowly healed, the raw wounds fading to angry welts beneath her tunic. But the memory of the lash and the desperate gamble it represented only strengthened her resolve. She saw the faces of the other slaves, gaunt with hunger, weary from labor, some too sick to rise. She saw the indifference of the nobles, the casual cruelty of overseers. This was not just about her and Senenmut anymore. It was about justice, about truth, about the lives of hundreds. Amenemheb's sabotage threatened them all. Meanwhile, the grand facade of Senenmut's life began to crack under the weight of his secret and his growing feelings for Hatshepsut. His family arrived from Memphis, a retinue of stern-faced uncles and sharply dressed aunts, their very presence radiating disapproval. His father, a stern patriarch with eyes that missed nothing, demanded to know why the wedding to Lady Mutemwia was delayed. "The temple requires my full attention, father," Senenmut explained, his voice carefully neutral. "The complexities of Amenhotep's vision are immense." "Nonsense," his father boomed. "Your duty is to your lineage. The Vizier Ramos grows impatient. This marriage solidifies our position at court. Are you truly so consumed by stone and mortar that you forget what truly matters? Vizier Ramos, Lady Mutemwia's father, a man whose ambition burned brighter than 1,000 desert suns, began his own quiet investigation into Senenmut's distraction. He had placed his spies throughout the court and construction site, sensing a weakness he could exploit, an opportunity to advance his family's influence. He noted Senenmut's unusual preoccupation, his late nights, his often haggard appearance. He dismissed it as artistic temperament, but his keen political mind filed away every unusual detail, every whispered rumor. Lady Mutemwia herself, initially a creature of pampered innocence and aristocratic grace, began to feel a profound unease. She had always imagined her marriage to Senenmut as a formality, a comfortable arrangement, but his aloofness, his distant gaze, spoke of a heart already given away. She saw the way his eyes lingered on the construction site, a passion there that he never showed for her. A cold, bitter hurt blossomed in her chest. She watched him, longing for his attention, sensing the invisible wall he had built around himself. Her naivete slowly eroded, replaced by a dawning, painful understanding. The temple construction pressed onward, an unstoppable force. The pharaoh, Amenhotep III, announced his imminent arrival for a royal inspection, accompanied by his full, magnificent court, including the shrewd and influential Queen Tiye. The air crackled with anticipation and terror. This was Amenemheb's moment. On the day of the inspection, the construction site hummed with a nervous energy. Priests purified the grounds with incense, soldiers stood at attention, and overseers barked final orders. Pharaoh Amenhotep III arrived in a grand procession, his golden regalia gleaming under the brilliant sun, Queen Tiye by his side, her regal bearing commanding unspoken respect. Amenemheb, resplendent in fine linen, presented his plans with an arrogant confidence that made Hatshepsut's stomach churn. His voice, smooth and assured, explained the intricate details, the grand vision. No one, he believed, understood the true nature of his subtle, deadly sabotage. He had woven the flaws so deeply, so cunningly, into the very fabric of the design, that only an eye as trained and unconventional as Hatshepsut's could detect them. Hatshepsut stood among the silent slaves, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Her amber eyes, usually so sharp, were wide with horror as she watched the pharaoh nod in approval, his gaze sweeping over the elaborate blueprints. The fatal miscalculations, the intentional weaknesses, were all there, approved by the highest authority in Egypt. She saw it all. The knowledge was a burning agony. The temple's main sanctuary, destined to be the grandest and most sacred chamber, was designed to collapse under its own weight once the final massive granite columns and the heavy roof stones were put in place. Hundreds of workers, priests and nobles would be present for the said festival ceremony, a sacred celebration of the pharaoh's enduring rule. They would all be crushed, and the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife would be forever marred. Her worst fears were confirmed. She was a slave, invisible, voiceless, forced to witness the coming catastrophe. That night, under a sky bruised purple and indigo, Hatshepsut slipped away to their secret meeting place. 6 months had passed since their first clandestine encounter. 6 months of stolen hours, of whispered lessons, of a connection that had deepened into a love she had never dared to dream of. Senenmut was already there, his face etched with worry. He had seen Katie's lash marks, had known her pain. "Hatshepsut," he began, his voice rough with emotion. I can no longer deny what is in my heart. I love you, more than my name, more than my duty, more than life itself." He reached for her, his touch light, tentative, a whisper against her arm, but it sent shivers through her. This was the moment she had both longed for and dreaded. Her own love for him swelled, a tide threatening to overwhelm her. But duty, now a heavier burden than any stone, prevailed. "Senenmut," she said, pulling away, her voice urgent. "There is something far more important, something terrible." She unrolled a small scroll of papyrus, revealing meticulous drawings, intricate calculations, and chilling annotations she had secretly made over the past months. "Amenemheb, he is sabotaging the temple," she explained with frantic precision, pointing to the deliberate flaws, the hidden weaknesses that would lead to disaster. She showed him the evidence, cross-referencing his own plans with her observations from the construction site, exposing the venomous jealousy that had driven Amenemheb to risk the pharaoh's very legacy. Senenmut stared, his brilliant mind racing to process the information, to verify her claims. His face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief, then in dawning horror. The implications were staggering. Trusting a slave's word against a noble architect, especially one connected to the court, meant utter ruin. But Hatshepsut's calculations were undeniable. The logic was flawless. The truth, stark and terrifying, stared him in the face. "If I am wrong," he agonizingly whispered, his voice hoarse, "we both die. We are condemned as traitors. But if I am right, Egypt loses a pharaoh and hundreds perish in a collapse that will stain our history forever." The weight of the decision pressed down on him, a crushing burden. He saw his carefully built life, his family's honor, his very existence hanging by a thread. But then he looked at Hatshepsut, her eyes shining with courage and conviction, and knew he could not betray her or the truth. Their fragile understanding, however, was about to be shattered by a more insidious betrayal. Lady Mutemwia, driven by a desperate desire to salvage her future and egged on by her father's political machinations, had finally used the palace spies her father had placed to monitor Senenmut. The reports detailed his strange absences, the whispered rumors of a slave woman. Her heart, once naive, now hardened by jealousy, felt the sting of betrayal. Her betrothal was a political asset, and she would not see it squandered. She confronted Senenmut, her eyes brimming with calculated tears. "How could you?" she accused, her voice trembling. "A slave! My spies have reported your indiscretions. Do you understand what this means? My family's honor, my future, our alliance. Unless you proceed with our marriage immediately, I will be forced to expose your scandalous affair. Your career, your family, all of it will be ruined, and your Nubian paramour, she will pay the ultimate price." Her threat was not just personal, it was a political maneuver, tearing him between duty and the woman he loved. Unbeknownst to them, Amenemheb, through his own network of informants, learned of Lady Mutemwia's discovery. A cruel smile stretched his thin lips. This was his chance. He approached Lady Mutumwia's father, Vizier Ramos, with a chilling proposition. "Master Vizier," he purred, "I understand there is a problem with the Master Builder's affections. A slave, I hear. Such an embarrassment. But these matters can be handled quietly, permanently." His implication was clear. He would get rid of Hatshepsut, thereby removing Senenmut's distraction and clearing his own path to power. Hatshepsut unknowingly had become a pawn in a deadly game of power and ambition, her very life expendable in the eyes of those who craved power. But even in the deepest shadows, allies began to emerge. Ptahhotep, the meticulous royal scribe, a man of quiet integrity, had been reviewing Amenemheb's architectural records. He had noticed subtle mathematical inconsistencies, anomalies that his keen mind could not ignore. He cautiously approached Hatshepsut, having observed her quiet wisdom. "My lady," he whispered, meeting her gaze with a knowing look. "There are strange numbers in the plans. Calculations that defy logic. If you possess any insight—" It was a subtle plea, an offer of a hand in the darkness. Kayemwaset, the veteran slave, having witnessed Hatshepsut's unwavering courage and profound intellect, began quietly organizing other slaves. He spread word of her compassion, her efforts to help the sick. A quiet network of protection formed around her, a silent shield among the oppressed who instinctively understood her importance. Some younger nobles, those less entrenched in the rigid hierarchies, had begun to question the established order, whispering about merit over birth, a dangerous sentiment that hinted at a shift in the unchanging sands of Egyptian society. Yet, despite these flickers of hope, the inevitable crept closer. Construction on the flawed sanctuary began in earnest, an unstoppable march toward disaster. Hatshepsut watched, helpless, as the massive granite columns were hoisted into place, each one adding to the fatal stress on the compromised foundation. She saw the faces of the workers, the friends she had made among the laborers, their bodies straining under the colossal weight, unknowingly building their own tomb. She tried subtle warnings, strategically misplaced tools, faint lines in the sand, but they were ignored by the overseers, lost in the roar of the construction. Senenmut, a tortured soul, was forced to supervise the very work he knew would lead to ruin. Each command he gave, each block he approved, felt like a betrayal. He walked the site, his jaw clenched, his eyes haunted by the vision of collapse. The temple, once his pride, became a symbol of his agonizing choice, torn between duty to the pharaoh and the truth that burned within him. He saw the first visible cracks appear in the massive foundation stones, thin as spiderwebs, but growing. He heard the faint creaking sounds, the ominous groans of stressed stone. The temple itself seemed to be crying out in protest. The day of the ceremonial blessing arrived, a day of magnificent pomp and sacred ritual. Pharaoh Amenhotep III, his full court, and hundreds of priests and nobles gathered in the antechamber of the temple's sanctuary. Incense filled the air, hymns echoed off the high walls, and the energy of anticipation was palpable. But high above, unseen by most, the hairline cracks in the sanctuary walls began to spread, thin fissures widening with each passing moment. The faint creaking turned into an ominous groan, a sound only Hatshepsut, with her intimate knowledge of the structure's fatal flaws, truly recognized. A fine dust, like silent tears, began to fall from the ceiling. Hatshepsut, standing among the ranks of silent slaves, felt her heart hammer against her ribs. The collapse was imminent. It was now or never. With a surge of desperate courage, a final unyielding resolve born of love and duty, she broke from the slave ranks. Cries of outrage erupted as she sprinted toward the pharaoh, her bare feet pounding on the cold stone. The ceiling above them groaned ominously, a sound like the earth itself tearing apart. The sacred ceremony in the temple's antechamber was poised on the precipice of eternity. Priests chanting ancient prayers, their voices weaving a solemn tapestry with the scent of burning frankincense. Nobles, adorned in their finest linens and glistening gold, bore witness to the blessing of the pharaoh's eternal resting place, their faces alight with reverence. Hatshepsut, a mere shadow among the silent slaves, her heart a frantic, rebellious drum against her ribs, knew a truth that could shatter this sacred moment. The temple's sanctuary, invisible to the ceremonial gaze of all but her, showed the visible stress fractures, widening with each passing agonizing second. They were fatal. With a gasp that was swallowed by the booming chants, Hatshepsut broke from the slave ranks. The collective intake of breath from the startled court was a single, shocked gasp. She moved not with grace, but with a desperate, raw urgency, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone floor. A chorus of horrified cries erupted, priests' hymns faltering, nobles rising in outrage. How dare a slave, a mere chattel, profane this most sacred of moments? Stone dust, fine as powdered bone, began to drift from the ceiling, a ghostly omen. "Great Pharaoh!" Hatshepsut's voice, though hoarse from fear, somehow pierced the stunned silence, ringing with an unyielding conviction. "The temple will collapse and take your eternal soul with it." The court erupted. A cacophony of indignant shouts filled the cavernous chamber. "Seize her! Execution! Blasphemy!" Amenemeb, his face a mask of furious indignation, his eyes secretly wide with fear of exposure, pushed through the panicked nobles. "Sacrilege! This slave dares to insult the pharaoh's sacred temple. Her tongue should be cut out, her life forfeited for such an abominable lie." His voice, normally so smooth, was shrill with thinly veiled panic. Pharaoh Amenhotep III, accustomed to unquestioning obedience, was a statue of regal fury, his eyes blazing. But the words of the slave, coupled with the faint, insidious creaking sound that had begun to spread, intrigued him. He saw the genuine terror in Hatshepsut's amber eyes, and the thin stream of dust falling onto his gold-encrusted robe. His gaze, sharp and penetrating, landed on the spiderweb cracks now visible to even the most untrained eye, spreading across the sanctuary's majestic ceiling. "Silence!" His voice boomed, silencing the tumultuous court. "The slave speaks of collapse. If her words hold truth, then it is a matter for the gods and for justice. Prove it." Hatshepsut, her body trembling but her spirit unyielding, knelt before the pharaoh. Senenmut, his heart in his throat, watched from the periphery, his hand clenching a silent fist of support. Queen T, Amenhotep's chief consort, a woman of formidable intellect and astute observation, leaned forward, her coal-lined eyes fixed on Hatshepsut, an expression of keen interest gracing her regal features. The air vibrated with a tension almost unbearable. "Great Pharaoh," Hatshepsut began, her voice gaining strength, "I ask only for sand and stones." The scribes, bewildered, hurried to comply, bringing trays of fine sand and small, rough-hewn stones. Before the disbelieving eyes of the court, Hatshepsut began to work. Her calloused fingers moved with an ancient grace, tracing lines in the sand, arranging stones with practiced precision. She began to recreate a miniature model of the sanctuary's foundation, pointing out where the measurements were subtly, catastrophically wrong. She showed how the weight of the massive granite columns, once set, would exert pressure on points not designed to bear it, leading to inevitable fracture. She explained the Nubian engineering principles, her father's sacred geometry, that would have prevented such a flaw, demonstrating how a series of interconnected support arches, rather than flat foundations, could distribute the weight evenly, ensuring eternal stability. Her voice, calm and clear, filled the chamber, speaking of angles and vectors, stress points and load distribution, a language alien yet utterly compelling. The court watched in stunned amazement as a mere slave, a woman, displayed knowledge that not only rivaled but surpassed that of the greatest architects of Egypt. A collective murmur rippled through the assembled nobles. Conservative voices, rooted in tradition and rigid social order, rose in protest. "This is heresy," cried a prominent priest, his voice laced with venom. A slave teaching the sacred craft, a woman speaking of engineering, this defies Ma'at, the order of the cosmos. Vizier Ramos, seeing his political aspirations tied to the downfall of Senenmut and the continued oppression of the slaves, seized the opportunity. He argued vehemently against Hatshepsut's claims, attempting to discredit her, knowing that if she succeeded, it would undermine the very foundations of their stratified society. "Pharaoh, her word is a slave's word. She seeks to sow discord. This is a plot." But Queen Tai, her gaze unwavering, stepped forward. "My lord Pharaoh," she interjected, her voice calm but authoritative, "truth is not diminished by the mouth that speaks it, and competence knows no station," the temple groans. Shall we ignore the wisdom that comes from an unexpected source simply because of who she is? Her words resonated with a growing faction of younger nobles and those who valued progress over rigid tradition. The pharaoh, caught between the demands of his traditional court and the undeniable evidence before him, felt the very temple groan around them. Amenhotep, his mind a labyrinth of power and pragmatism, dispatched his most trusted royal engineers to verify Hatshepsut's claims. They returned minutes later, their faces pale, their expressions grim. Their own instruments confirmed her every calculation. The foundation was indeed flawed, fatally so. And then Ptahhotep, the scribe, stepped forward, his eyes alight with quiet triumph. He presented a scroll he had secretly compiled, Amenemeb's personal notes, hidden within the administrative tents. They detailed, in the rival architect's own hand, the deliberate introduction of flaws, motivated by a chilling jealousy and a desire to see Senenmut utterly destroyed. Amenemheb's face drained of color, his carefully constructed lies crumbling around him like the very stone dust that now rained down from the ceiling. Senenmut, his eyes locking with Hatshepsut's, a silent promise passing between them, stepped forward. His heart swelled with an overwhelming pride, a love so profound it eclipsed all fear. "My lord Pharaoh," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "this woman speaks the truth. Not only has she exposed a heinous treachery, but she has offered solutions that surpass my own understanding. She has saved not only lives, but your eternal journey. This woman has saved the Pharaoh's journey to eternity." The Pharaoh's judgment was swift and absolute. Amenemheb was stripped of his rank, his titles, his vast wealth, and exiled to the scorching, unforgiving desert, his legacy forever erased from the annals of royal architects. Katie, the brutal overseer, was demoted, his power stripped, for his failure to recognize Hatshepsut's worth and for his reprehensible treatment of the very slaves who served the crown. Lady Mutemwia, seeing the true depth of Senenmut's feelings for Hatshepsut and perhaps moved by a private conversation with Queen Tia about the true nature of love and duty, gracefully withdrew from the betrothal, her dignity intact. Vizier Ramos, though disappointed, gained grudging respect for handling the broken alliance with unexpected honor, preserving his family's standing despite the setback. The court remained divided. Conservative nobles and priests, clinging to ancient traditions, petitioned relentlessly against Hatshepsut's elevation, citing precedent, religious law, and the perceived threat to the established order. The pharaoh, a shrewd ruler, understood that a sudden, radical shift could destabilize his realm. He consulted tirelessly with priests, legal scholars, and his wisest advisors, seeking a path that would reward Hatshepsut's extraordinary merit without igniting a full-blown social revolution. A compromise was eventually reached. Hatshepsut would be granted not only her freedom, but a newly created, unprecedented position as Royal Consultant for Sacred Architecture, a title that acknowledged her unique expertise without directly challenging the traditional, male-dominated hierarchy of architects. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Hatshepsut shed the coarse, stained rags of a slave for the flowing, immaculate white linen of a free woman, a ceremonial act witnessed by the entire court. Every delicate pleat, every luminous fold spoke of her newfound liberty and burgeoning influence. With the pharaoh's blessing, she and Senenmut were granted permission to marry, an act that shattered centuries of social barriers. Senenmut's family, initially resistant, was slowly won over by Hatshepsut's undeniable intellect, her quiet strength, and the palpable devotion of their son. They eventually gave their blessing, impressed by her abilities and the pharaoh's decree. Together, as equal partners, Hatshepsut and Senenmut redesigned the temple. Their combined genius, a fusion of Egyptian grandeur and Nubian innovation, created a structure that would influence architecture for millennia. Its revolutionary techniques in foundation, ventilation, and structural integrity became legendary. Impressed by their collaboration and the success of the new temple, the pharaoh commissioned them to establish Egypt's first integrated school of architecture, a daring experiment starting with a small group of talented individuals, selected regardless of their birth or social standing. Immerse, the wise old slave who had silently supported Hatshepsut, was among the first granted his freedom, and proudly became one of the inaugural graduates of their architectural school, his weathered hands now guiding new students. Tahotep, the meticulous scribe whose keen eye had first noted the inconsistencies, became the official chronicler of their new architectural methods, ensuring their innovations were preserved for posterity. Other slaves who had shown aptitude, who had dreamed of a life beyond bondage, were given opportunities for education and advancement, their eyes shining with a hope once unimaginable. Senenmut's extended family, initially a bastion of resistance, gradually came to respect Hatshepsut, accepting her not just as a part of their lineage, but as a brilliant mind in her own right. Their wedding ceremony took place in the majestic shadow of the Great Pyramid, a poignant symbol of their journey. Former slaves, their faces alight with pride and tears, mingled cautiously with nobles, though some aristocratic families, clinging to old prejudices, chose to boycott the unprecedented union. Hatshepsut's architectural innovations became legendary throughout the ancient world, influencing temple design and urban planning across the vast Egyptian empire. She began training other women in engineering and mathematics, creating a lasting social change, though progress was gradual and faced ongoing resistance from entrenched patriarchal systems. Their love story, a testament to merit triumphing over birth, became a powerful symbol, inspiring countless others, yet also sparking controversy and debate across the kingdom. 5 years later, the once barren grounds around the new school teemed with life and learning. Hatshepsut, her spirit radiant, her belly swollen with their second child, moved among her students, demonstrating complex principles of sacred geometry. The school had grown, its reputation spreading far beyond Egypt's borders, but it still faced political challenges and subtle social resistance. Senenmut watched her, his heart overflowing with a love that only deepened with time. Their revolutionary temple design had indeed become the model for several new constructions, though traditional architects still resisted some of their more radical innovations. Hatshepsut, her hand gently resting on the cold, smooth cornerstone of a new temple they were designing together, felt a flutter within her, a tiny kick from the life growing inside. "The stones still whisper to me, my love," she told Senenmut, her eyes holding the wisdom of ages and the light of a new dawn. "But now they speak of hope." She paused, a shadow of realism crossing her face, a testament to her enduring pragmatism. Though the path is long, and many still resist change. The scene pulled back, revealing the bustling school, where former slaves and children of nobles worked side by side, their minds united in the pursuit of knowledge and beauty. Yet even from afar, one could discern the figures of protesters outside the walls, and the haughty glances of conservative nobles passing by, their disapproval a stark reminder that true change was an ongoing struggle. In the distance, the eternal pyramids stood as silent witnesses to a love that had not only transformed two hearts, but had begun the slow, arduous, yet ultimately triumphant reshaping of an entire civilization's understanding of human worth and limitless potential. 7 years had etched their passage since the sacred ceremonies that had nearly ended in ruin. 7 years since Hatshepsut, a slave, had dared to speak truth to power in the very heart of the pharaoh's temple. Now, the sun, still a merciless eye in the Egyptian sky, found her not amidst the dust and clamour of construction, but in a sun-dappled courtyard, the heart of the royal school of sacred architecture. Her laughter, free and unrestrained, mingled with the delighted shrieks of 2 small children. Their eldest, a boy of 5 named Khonsu, after the moon god, was a whirlwind of energy, already fascinated by the miniature mud brick structures his mother often built to illustrate lessons. His dark eyes, so like Hatshepsut's, sparkled with an inherited curiosity. 3-year-old Nefer, their daughter, a tiny mirror of Senenmut, with her fair skin and serious gaze, sat patiently beside her mother, arranging painted pebbles into geometric patterns on a mat. The hum of the school, once a daring experiment, now resonated with the confident murmurs of students from every stratum of society, former slaves working diligently beside the sons and daughters of minor nobles, their minds united by the divine language of architecture. Their love, born in stolen whispers under the moon, had deepened with each passing season, weaving itself into the very fabric of their lives. It was not a tempestuous flame now, but a deep, steady ember, warmed by mutual respect and a shared vision. Senenmut would often find Hatshepsut lost in thought, tracing designs on papyrus, her brow furrowed in concentration. He would silently bring her a cup of cool water, or simply stand by, his presence a quiet strength. There was an unspoken language between them, a brush of hands as they passed a stylus, a shared glance across a crowded hall, a warmth that radiated from their souls, a testament to a bond forged in fire and tempered by time. Their days were a tapestry of shared passion, designing, teaching, dreaming of structures that would reach for eternity. The school flourished, a vibrant testament to their unwavering belief in merit. Immerse, now a free man and a revered elder, taught practical stonemasonry, his calloused hands guiding eager students, his eyes holding the wisdom of a man who had seen the deepest pits of human cruelty and the highest peaks of human ingenuity. His stories, shared during breaks, were lessons in resilience and the hidden strength of the human spirit. Ptah-hotep, the meticulous scribe, now held a prominent position as the school's chief archivist and historian, his precise records meticulously documenting every new innovation, every groundbreaking design. He had a particular fondness for Hatshepsut's lectures, often taking notes more detailed than those of his own students. Yet progress, like the slow carving of granite, required endless patience. The school, while celebrated by Pharaoh Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye, still faced subtle, persistent resistance. Conservative nobles, steeped in generations of inherited privilege, continued to send their sons to the older, more traditional temple schools, scoffing at the notion of learning alongside former chattel. Protesters, though fewer in number than in the early days, still occasionally gathered outside the school walls, their placards decrying the unnatural mixing of classes and the arrogance of the new ways. But these were the faint echoes of a battle largely won. The pharaoh himself, having witnessed Hatshepsut's genius firsthand, remained a staunch supporter, commissioning their school for all major projects, effectively legitimizing their methods and their integrated student body. Not all fates had been as fortunate. Amenemheb's tale became a cautionary whisper among the younger architects. Exiled to the remote desert oases, stripped of his titles and wealth, he had reportedly succumbed to a fever in his second year of banishment, a lonely, ignominious end for a man consumed by envy. His name, once synonymous with architectural promise, was now spoken only as a warning against unchecked ambition. Katie, the brutal overseer, had indeed paid a high price for his cruelty. Stripped of his authority and relegated to the most menial tasks, his spirit had withered under the scorn of those he once oppressed. He moved like a ghost through the construction sites, a broken man, a hollow reminder that even in a society built on power, justice, however slow, could find its way. Lady Mutemwia, freed from her unwanted betrothal, had found a different path to contentment. After a period of quiet reflection, she had chosen to devote herself to the Temple of Hathor, becoming a priestess, a life of quiet devotion and significant influence within the religious sphere. She occasionally encountered Senenmut and Hatshepsut at court ceremonies. Her gaze, once filled with bitterness, now held a detached serenity, a hint of understanding. She had found her own form of freedom, not in marriage or power, but in spiritual purpose. Her father, Vizier Ramos, though his political influence had waned slightly with the rise of new ideas and the Queen's favour, had maintained his position, his pragmatism adapting to the changing currents of the court. He was still a force to be reckoned with, but a more cautious one, keenly aware that the old rules no longer applied as rigidly as before. The most profound change was subtle, yet pervasive. The whisper of a new idea in the heart of the kingdom. The concept of merit, of individual skill triumphing over the accident of birth, had taken root. It was a slow, arduous process, one that would unfold over generations, but the first cracks in the ancient, unyielding edifice of Egyptian social hierarchy had been made. Hatshepsut and Senenmut stood at the forefront of this quiet revolution, not with swords or political rhetoric, but with blueprints and the undeniable elegance of their designs. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Hatshepsut and Senenmut stood on the highest point of the newly completed Hall of Annals, a wing added to the mortuary temple, a testament to their continued collaboration. Their hands met, fingers intertwining, a simple, profound gesture that spoke volumes of a love that had defied every obstacle. Below them, the sprawling complex gleamed, its walls now inscribed with hieroglyphs detailing their innovations, their names etched into immortality alongside the pharaohs. "Our son asked me today," Hatshepsut mused, her voice soft, "if the stones still speak to me." Senenmut turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting the fading light. "And what did you tell him, my love?" She smiled, a hint of ancient wisdom in her gaze. "I told him that yes, they always will. But now," she tightened her grip on his hand, her voice filled with a quiet triumph, "they sing." The wind, a timeless breath across the desert, carried their words, and the silent, majestic pyramids, eternal sentinels of history, stood witness to a love story that had not merely endured, but had blossomed, forever changing the landscape of Egypt, one stone, one dream, one heart at a time. Their legacy was not just in the colossal structures they built, but in the enduring hope they inspired, a light piercing the shadows, guiding a civilization toward a future built on the unshakable foundation of human potential. And so, our journey through ancient Egypt concludes, leaving us not just with the echoes of a timeless love story, but with profound lessons that resonate even in our modern world. Hatshepsut and Senenmut's tale is a powerful testament to the idea that true worth is found not in lineage or status, but in courage, intellect, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. It shows us that even in the most rigid societies, the human spirit, armed with knowledge and conviction, can shatter ancient barriers and forge a path towards a more just and enlightened future. Their love, born in the shadows and tested by fire, reminds us that the deepest connections are those built on mutual respect and shared dreams, capable of weathering any storm. This isn't just a story about grand temples and hidden secrets. It's about the quiet strength of one woman who dared to challenge the impossible and the man who chose to stand by her, even when it meant risking everything. It's a reminder that change, though often slow and met with resistance, is always possible when brave hearts commit to a vision greater than themselves. What did you think of Hatshepsut and Senenmut's incredible journey? Did their determination inspire you? Which character's transformation moved you the most? Share your thoughts, your emotions, and your own takeaways in the comments below. And if you were swept away by this epic tale, if you truly stayed with us until the very last whisper of the wind across the desert sands, type the word destiny in the comments. It helps us know who our most dedicated viewers are, and it lets us bring you even more stories like this one. Don't let the adventure end here. If you crave more dramatic romances and historical sagas, be sure to check out the other narratives we've linked for you in the cards above. Until next time, may your own journey be filled with courage, truth, and a love that can build empires.